Breaking news, and if you're watching this right now, you need to hear this carefully, because a single idea has been spreading across the country, lighting up social media, news headlines, and kitchen table conversations. People are asking the same urgent question over and over again. Is a $2,000 tariff refund check really coming? And if so, will it actually reach your bank account? For millions of Americans struggling with high prices, credit card debt, rent that keeps rising, and grocery bills that never seem to come down, even the possibility of that kind of money feels like oxygen. And that's exactly why this story matters. Because hope without clarity can be dangerous, and misinformation can cost you real money. Here on US Economy Today, we don't chase hype. We break down what's actually happening, why it's happening, and what it really means for you. If you're watching this because you've heard talk about a tariff dividend or a tariff refund tied to President Donald Trump, you're not alone. This idea has been popping up everywhere. In interviews, public statements, and online clips, the message has sounded bold and simple. Tariffs are bringing in massive amounts of money, and that money could be sent back to the American people in the form of a $2,000 payment. No complicated applications, no long waits, just a direct check or deposit, similar to the stimulus payments many people remember from the pandemic. And when people hear that, the reaction is immediate. Relief, skepticism, confusion, sometimes all three at once. So before we go any further, I want you to pause and really think about this. When you first heard about a possible $2,000 check, what did you feel? Did it feel like help was finally on the way, or did it feel like another promise that might never materialize? To understand what's really going on, we have to start at the beginning, not just of this proposal, but of the economic pressure that made it resonate in the first place. Over the past several years, American households have been squeezed from every direction. Prices surged quickly during the pandemic and never fully came back down. Food costs jumped, energy costs spiked, housing became more expensive whether you rent or own. Wages rose for some, but for many people, especially those on fixed incomes or hourly pay, they didn't rise nearly fast enough. Savings that once felt comfortable have been drained. Emergency funds disappeared. Credit cards became a lifeline, and now balances are sitting at record highs with interest rates that make it harder to catch up every month. In that environment, any talk of direct cash hits differently. It feels personal, it feels urgent, and it feels deserved. That's where the tariff refund idea enters the picture. The basic argument sounds straightforward. Tariffs are taxes placed on imported goods. Those tariffs bring in revenue to the federal government. If that revenue is large enough, why not share it with the American people in the form of a dividend or refund? The number that keeps coming up is $2,000. The language used has been deliberate. Dividend, refund, money back to the people. It frames the payment not as a handout, but as a return of money Americans have effectively already paid through higher prices. And on an emotional level, that framing works, because people know prices went up, and they know those increases hurt. But this is where we have to slow down, take a breath, and separate what sounds good from what actually works in practice. Yes, tariffs do generate revenue. That part is not in dispute. In recent years, tariff collections have risen sharply. Estimates for annual tariff revenue range widely, depending on which tariffs are active and how trade flows adjust, but numbers in the hundreds of billions have been discussed. That's a lot of money. However, when you compare that revenue to the cost of sending $2,000 to a large portion of the population, the math becomes much more complicated. The United States has roughly 300 million people. Even if payments were limited to adults or households, you're still talking about a program that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars for a single round. And that's assuming it only happens once. Here's where the scale of the federal budget comes into play. The government already spends more than it collects each year. deficits regularly reach into the trillions. Major programs like Social Security, Medicare, defense, and interest on the national debt consume enormous portions of the budget. When economists and budget analysts look at a proposal like this, their first question isn't whether the money would help people, it's whether there's a sustainable funding source that doesn't worsen long-term fiscal problems. And on that front, skepticism is high. Tariff revenue alone doesn't appear sufficient to cover a universal $2,000 payment without pulling funds from elsewhere or increasing deficits even further. Another key piece of this story is understanding who actually pays tariffs. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of trade policy. On paper, tariffs are paid by importers when goods enter the United States. But in the real world, companies don't simply absorb those costs, they pass them on. When an importer pays a tariff on clothing, electronics, appliances, or food products, that cost shows up in the price you see at the store. Sometimes it shows up directly. Sometimes it's spread across multiple products. But either way, consumers feel it. Multiple economic studies have shown that American households bear a significant portion of the cost of tariffs through higher prices. Some estimates suggest that the average household has paid thousands of dollars more per year as a result. That's why critics argue that a $2,000 tariff refund wouldn't be free money. It would be closer to a partial reimbursement. Money you already paid, just spread out over time through higher prices instead of all at once. And that distinction matters. Getting a lump sum can still help. It can help pay down debt, cover an emergency, or rebuild savings. But it changes the narrative. It's not new wealth. It's closer to balancing the scales, and even then, not evenly. Some households may have paid more than $2,000 in higher prices, others less. The impact varies widely depending on spending patterns, family size, and income level. Timing is another area where uncertainty dominates. Over time, different timelines have been floated. Summer, fall, end of the year. At other moments, the emphasis shifted away from specific dates and toward the general concept. That shift is important because it signals that this idea is still in the discussion stage, not the execution stage. There is no finalized plan, no official program, no eligibility criteria, no application portal, no instructions from the IRS or Treasury. Right now, it's a proposal, not a policy. And if you've watched economic policy over the years, you know how many proposals never make it to reality. When stimulus checks went out during the pandemic, there was legislation passed by Congress, signed into law, with clearly defined rules. Agencies had marching orders, systems were built, timelines were established. None of that exists here yet. And that leads directly to the biggest obstacle of all, which is Congress. Despite suggestions that a president could issue payments unilaterally, the reality is clear. Only Congress has the authority to authorize spending of this kind. That's not a technicality. It's a foundational principle of how the U.S. government works. Any program that sends direct payments to individuals would almost certainly require legislation. That means debate, negotiation, amendments, votes, and compromises. It means delays. It means uncertainty. We've already seen related ideas struggle to gain traction. Smaller payment proposals stalled in committee. Other versions shifted toward tax deductions instead of checks, which changes the impact entirely. A tax deduction might reduce your taxable income, but it doesn't put cash in your pocket the way a direct payment does. And every step through the legislative process introduces new variables. Income limits, phase-outs, eligibility restrictions, funding offsets. What starts as a bold promise often emerges as a much narrower program, if it emerges at all. There's also a legal cloud hanging over the tariff system itself. Some tariffs are being challenged in court. If courts ultimately rule that certain tariffs were imposed improperly, the government could be required to refund money to the companies that paid them. That would redirect funds away from any consumer-focused program. And even if companies receive refunds, there's no guarantee those savings would quickly translate into lower prices or consumer payments. Businesses don't pass savings along as quickly as they pass costs along. That lag is well documented, and it's another reason why the idea of a simple, direct connection between tariffs and checks breaks down under scrutiny. When you look at prediction markets, where people wager real money on political and economic outcomes, the odds reflect this uncertainty. The probability of $2,000 payments going out in the near term is not high. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It means informed observers see significant barriers. And those barriers are not about whether people need help. They're about whether the machinery of government can deliver on this specific promise. All of this might sound discouraging, but it's important to understand why this idea has gained so much attention in the first place. Financial stress is real. According to Federal Reserve data, a large share of Americans struggle to cover even modest emergency expenses. Savings rates are down, debt levels are up. Fixed incomes haven't kept pace with costs. When leaders talk about sending money directly to people, it resonates because it speaks to lived experience. It acknowledges pressure, it acknowledges strain, and that acknowledgement matters, even if the policy outcome remains uncertain. Supporters of the tariff refund concept argue that tariffs are part of a broader strategy to strengthen domestic industries and rebalance trade relationships. From that perspective, sharing tariff revenue with the public is about fairness. Critics see it as more symbolic than substantive, pointing to the lack of concrete details. Both views can exist at the same time. You can recognize the appeal of the idea while also recognizing the hurdles that stand in the way. So what should you do with this information right now? The most important thing is not to plan your finances around money that isn't guaranteed. There is no official check, no confirmed timeline, no certainty. If it happens, it could be helpful, but relying on it could put you in a worse position if it doesn't arrive. Delaying debt payments or skipping savings because you're expecting a check that never comes can backfire quickly. Instead, focus on what you can control. Track your spending. Look for areas where small changes can free up cash. Build or rebuild an emergency fund, even if it starts small. Those steps create real stability, regardless of what happens in Washington. Staying informed is also crucial, but so is perspective. Economic policy evolves, proposals change, headlines amplify early statements that may never become law. Understanding that process helps you avoid emotional whiplash. As this story develops, what matters most is not the promise itself, but whether it moves through the concrete steps required to become reality. Here on US Economy Today, our goal is to give you clarity, not hype. To explain what's being discussed, what's realistic, and what it means for your financial life. The idea of a $2,000 tariff refund check speaks to real need, but it also faces real legal, financial, and political barriers. It's something to watch, but not something to count on. Your financial security is too important to be built on uncertainty. As we continue to follow this story, we'll keep breaking down the facts, tracking the developments, and cutting through the noise. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss updates as they happen. And if you're watching this and feeling frustrated, hopeful, or somewhere in between, you're not alone. That mix of emotions is exactly why these conversations matter. Stay informed, stay realistic, and keep taking steps that strengthen your financial foundation, no matter what promises are being made. Thanks for watching US Economy Today.